so I begin in the name of Allah, for the love of Muhammad, to honor the ancestors and celebration of my people. I also begin as the descendant of stolen people on stolen land. I begin an acknowledgement of the land on which we gather is the unceded and ancestral territory of the Anacostan and Piscataway peoples. When Dr. Galt, who introduced Brittany and the CSAARL team presented this idea of doing a conference to us, they invited the Religion Advisory Council, of which I'm a member, to sort of suggest ideas, sort of informed by our specific faith tradition. And for me, being Black and being Muslim has always been concerned with questions of justice. And because of the work I'm currently doing around Black Muslim women's activism, the first site of injustice that came to me was the prison and mass incarceration. And I see the prison as this deep side of injustice, but also a side of agency. Most famously, we have stories like Brother Malcolm X or Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz's discovery of self and conversion to Islam in prison, to the testimony of Safia Bukhari, right, to this way in which God foretold for her her escape from prison and also her return. And even in my own personal story, my mother became Muslim in a prison, but she wasn't incarcerated. But Black Muslim men who were being held captive created a masjid that she attended. And so there's this tradition that I see of sort of being in a captive situation, but not being totally captured by it. And so while we'll be talking today about prison and abolition from a Muslim perspective, I think that this conversation also is emblematic of the broader Black faith perspective, the way in which kind of Black faith communities in this country, in this hemisphere, despite what seems like insurmountable obstacles, we sort of not only make a way, but we build a future. And so that's kind of the context that I want to give. And so now I'm going to introduce our present panelists. So we have Brother Jihad Abdulmumit. Jihad Abdulmumit is the chairperson of the National Jericho Movement, which supports political prisoners in the United States and campaigns to win their freedom. He is a community activist, motivational speaker, playwright, and retired healthcare provider. Jihad was a domestic political prisoner and prisoner of war and served 23 years of his life in prison for his involvement in the Black Liberation Movement. Then we have Dr. Ilyasah Shabazz, daughter of Malcolm X, professor and author. Dr. Ilyasah Shabazz is an award-winning author, educator, and producer. She is chairperson of the Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz Memorial and Educational Center Board of Trustees. In her work to preserve the legacy of her parents, she has dedicated herself to institution building and intergenerational leadership development with the tenets of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Then we have Dr. Marc Lamont Hill. Dr. Marc Lamont Hill is currently the host of BET News, The Griot, Al Jazeera Upfront, and the Coffee and Books podcast. An award-winning journalist, Dr. Hill is the Presidential Professor of Anthropology and Urban Education at the City University of New York Graduate Center, and he's a social justice activist and organizer. He is the founder and director of the People's Education Center in Philadelphia, as well as the owner of Uncle Bobby's Coffee and Books. And we have Sister Kareemah Hanifa. Kareemah Hanifa is a Muslim native from Charleston, South Carolina, but spent most of her life in the state of Georgia. She was sentenced to life imprisonment as a juvenile, and she was released from prison in 2019. Kareemah has advocated alongside Georgia state lawmakers in the fight against felony disenfranchisement and rights restoration. Kareemah is a board member for the Georgia Coalition for Higher Education in Prison and is focused on building educational equity by using her lived, professional, and academic experience to see a world where we all have access to education. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. Thank you. Can you hear? Yeah? All right, thank you all for joining us today. I want to open the conversation. First, I'm going to present a question directly to Brother Jihad and Sister Kareemah. And then, of course, Dr. Shabazz and Dr. Hill can respond as well. So before we really get into this question of Islam and abolition, I wanted to invite you to kind of share with the audience your personal experience and relationship with prison or the carceral system. So either one can go.
Sister Kareemah, you can go first, inshallah.
Okay. First of all, Bismillah. All right, my name is Kareemah Hanifa. From the age of 15 to 41, I was incarcerated in the state of Georgia. I was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences and told that I was sentenced to prison for the duration of my natural life. During that incarceration, I decided that maybe my life wasn't over and that I should be the best person that I could be no matter where I was. And I think being very intentional about, creating a safe space for other people, leading the Islamic community in the state of Georgia, and just advocating for other prisoners gave me purpose. And in that purpose, Allah opened the doors eventually after 26 years.
Yes, thank you again for the question. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. Again, my name is Jihad Abdulmumit. I was a former political prisoner. I say political prisoner because I was a member of the Black Liberation Army and the Black Panther Party. I was incarcerated for a string of bank expropriations, of which I'm very proud of, in support of the Black Liberation Movement and the requirement of land for the Provisional Government of New Africa. So it's very intentional, no regrets. I make a joke, I said my only regret is I should have made a right turn instead of a left. But nevertheless, I was in prison at a young age in maximum security prisons in Leavenworth, Kansas, and Lewisburg, Federal Penitentiary in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. My case, because of the nature of my case, we continued organizing in prison. I took my Shahada in prison thanks to Dr. Shabazz's dad and his influence on all of us in the Black Liberation Movement. And I became a Muslim in prison, and I came out a much stronger person physically, mentally, and spiritually. So whatever the government had in terms of undermining the Black Liberation Movement as it relates to Jihad Abdulmumit, it backfired because now you have a very powerful soldier to deal with. And so I did plenty of organizing in prison, which we might can get to with the other questions. So it's incarceration, in new terms of revolutionary struggle in any regard, even as it reflects itself today for Cop City and the harassment of students and going to jail for ridiculous RICO charges and Terrorist Act. We recognize that prison is a part of our liberation movement, and we have to build that movement regardless if you're in prison or not. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. So my father, in his adolescence, was running from himself. He was running from his identity against the backdrop of Jim Crow. And his parents instilled specific values in him, moral values, values of education, literacy, integrity, and they told him he could be all that he wanted to be as a young Black boy. His father purchased land that was reserved for whites only. And they said, yes, you can purchase this land, but you can't live on it. And of course, we know, much like his son, that his father chose to live on his land and raise his family and be self-sufficient. His mother instilled the love of learning, the love of people, the love of humanity. And so when his father was lynched and his mother was put in an institution against her will, not because she was crazy, they set out to destroy Malcolm's family. And so when he finally was arrested, he had it was an opportunity for him to confront all from which he was running. Being Black in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, Jim Crow, all of these challenges, these man-made obstacles. And so Malcolm was always smart. He always had a book in his back pocket, even when he was an adolescent sneaking out the window, hanging out, right? And his aunt encouraged him to, when he got arrested, to go to the Colony Experimental Rehabilitative Prison, where, because they had a superior library. And we could talk about that later, but that's one of my experiences with the carceral system. And the other is, when I was in college, I volunteered at a girls' group home lockup facility. And there was this beautiful young girl that I met. She was 12 years old. She reminded me of my young sister Malika, innocent, big for her age, and just so adorable. And she was having an argument with one of the counselors. And before we knew it, they were rolling on the floor, fighting each other. And she was getting the best of him. And so you can imagine how infuriated he was. And so he called, he had her put in a room of, it was just horrible. I am claustrophobic, so I can't even imagine. And also a nurse to sedate her, and I asked, could I talk to her? I went in, I talked to her. She was sitting on the floor crying, a 12-year-old girl. And so, you know, it was just a matter of treating young people as if they were worthy, right? And what we discovered is anywhere from, some statistics say that anywhere from 70 to 94% of young women in the criminal justice system have a history of psychological abuse or sexual abuse before incarceration. And so it's such our responsibility to make sure that these young girls know, and boys, know their value, know their worth, know that they're worthy of love, worthy of a quality education, worthy to participate in mainstream society. So God bless you, sister, and especially for surviving as you have.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The question was sort of our relationship to the carceral system. So, I mean, so many, like most people growing up, at least where we grew up, I'm from Philadelphia. So many of our friends, so many of our family members, so many people in our neighborhood are intimately connected to the criminal legal system. They're either in jail, in prison, on parole, or on probation. You know, we often talk about the incarceration numbers, but so many of us are at the doorstep of prison once again because of these other processes and systems. So, you know, that's a big part of it for me. And for me, that connects to Islam in so many ways. You know, Islam in America has such a huge sort of debt in terms of its formation to Black Muslims in America. And so much of the Black Muslim experience in America is bound up in the criminal legal system. When you think about the earliest days of Islam in the United States, whether it's people who emerged out of Ahmadiyya movement, people who emerged out of the Moorish Science Temple, or whether it's the Nation of Islam post-1930, so much of the leadership either was produced out of prison or became political prisoners at some point. And so that hasn't really stopped. You know, I was thinking about a friend of mine who just came home after 30 years. When he came home last week, like maybe 2 weeks ago, and when he came home, I hadn't seen him since literally the 90s, and he was the imam of the prison that he was in. When we left, he wasn't imam of anything. I think about how many people have conversion experiences or reversion experiences inside of the prison. I think about how the story of Islam for so many of us begins, or the journey toward Islam in America begins, as my brother said, with Malcolm X. And we talk about Malcolm X in a very particular way, this sort of journey toward literacy, although he was already quite literate, as my sister just talked about. This journey towards self-understanding and awareness, knowledge of self, all of this happens inside the prison. And I think we sometimes romanticize the prison for that reason. We start to think that the prison is a healthy place. You know, I had, my brother he just called me actually while I was back there. I didn't get a chance to answer. He's he's got another 2.5 years. You know, he's been in and out of prison pretty much my adult life. And every time he goes in, my mom keeps hoping that he'll be like our cousin Dave specifically. That prison will straighten him out and make him okay. Because these people go in and they get serious, they read books, they get knowledge of stuff, they come out, they work, and it's almost as if they're okay because of the prison rather than despite the prison. And so while I appreciate how the prison, and this is the last thing I'll say, how the prison's been so formative for the expansion of Islam and for the expansion of so many other things, you know, resistance movements, political education, radicalization, all these beautiful things, that doesn't mean that the prison as a system works. And so we have to think toward abolition and think about how we can spread political education and bring people toward different faith traditions and do all of these things without caging them and without maintaining a system that is just reinforcing sort of slavery, modern day slavery.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I think all of your reflections, I think, speak to that. I like how you put that because, you know, you have young people, right, who are being like a 12-year-old in lockup, teenagers, people, these are kids, right? And the response, so we talk about this idea of like a carceral logic, right? Like so if someone, quote unquote, does something wrong, how do we respond to that? And this carceral logic is like we respond to it through punishment, right? Through caging, through captivity, as opposed to a lot of other ways that can be transformative. So I appreciate this idea of kind of both paying attention to the ways, the significance of the prison as a place, and the way Brother Jihad said how, like, you know, they were trying to undermine me, right? And I came out of this prison a soldier, right? I was, you know, as of that thing, and also holding the fact that this space is a diabolical space, really, right? It's, you know, to use Muslim terms, it's an un-Islamic space, right? So we don't want the perpetuation of those spaces. So I appreciate that, and so so thank you for opening up this idea about Islam, because I want to open that up too, in terms of thinking about, you know, when we think about the carceral system, we think about mass incarceration, and when we think about abolition as a way to respond to that, like how do you think Islam or your faith as a Muslim sort of shapes your understanding of that? That's kind of, does that make sense, that question? Yeah, so it's open to whoever would like to respond.
So thank you for the question, and I just want to reroute the question and share a faith practice that for me was instrumental and was developed during my incarceration. So about 18 years in, I became very desperate. Like, my mama can't save me, Johnny Cochran ain't living no more, like, I need a way out. I want out, right? And so I became so desperate that during a visit for my birthday, I don't remember how old I was turning, but it probably was 30 or 33, right? That I had this conversation with my mother where I asked her to fast with me. And she said to me, you shouldn't ask people to fast with you. You should fast for yourself, right? Because when you ask people to fast with you, then you're placing a responsibility on someone else, but you do what you can do yourself. And so I made a commitment to Allah to fast every other day until I was released from prison, which in Islam is considered the fast of Dawood. I did this for 8 years. At some point, I started like wanting to backpedal out of this, like, oh, what have I done, right? We make promises to people, but we don't necessarily keep them. But when you make a promise to God, like, you have to honor it, because we don't want Allah to renege on his promises over our life at any point. And so it gave me a discipline, but it also kept me very grounded. It kept me mindful of how I treated people around me. It kept me on my prayers, because as we all know, even during Ramadan, if you walk around all day and not eat and not drink, but you're cursing people out and you're becoming angry and you're stealing from people, like, you're just starving yourself. You're not really fasting. And so it kept me, you know, grounded. And there are times when I receive favor from Allah since I've been released that I don't believe that I deserve. And I always say to my husband, and I say, astaghfirullah, I say, you know, that fasting is still covering me, right? Which, you know, that's me in my mind. But I believe that it's residual of the fasting that I was doing, and me training myself to be compassionate and have empathy for other people, for all walks of life, and to serve in some capacity every single day of my life. So that is like a faith practice that I developed during incarceration that I still carry with me.
Yeah, I feel like you're saying too, like this in the place where where you're meant to not, like, your humanity is being, like, supposed to be stolen from you. Like you invested in it, right? And you sort of really grew it in many ways. But yeah.
I would, oh,
So there's two parts to this. That first one, myself personally, so I'm just going to build on what Sister Kareemah just said. So I went in prison as an armed combatant, young, very, very, very aggressive. And my relationship with the prison administration reflected that. Anything I can do to bring you down, I don't know if I pee in your cup, spit in it, put glass in your food, set a fire, and I'm telling the truth. Brother, I think your mic isn't on. Anything, sorry about that. I hope you caught that, because I don't remember what I said. I know how I feel. Okay. Yeah. Anything, because we're fighting a war. So the fact that you caught me, I didn't go apologetically to the judge. Matter of fact, I think I got the sentence I got because we never stood up when he came in the room. Because I'm fighting against you, and all of a sudden you capture me, and now I'm honoring you. So I don't have schizophrenia. So I maintain our, if you ever saw the movie Spook or Sat by the Door, when you get in prison, what you do is you organize, you continue. Oh, you didn't care. I'm not a criminal. I'm a revolutionary. But what happened when I took my Shahada, that type of attitude kind of changed in terms of still recognizing my enemy, and they are my enemy. They're not my friends, but also having a certain type of dignity and respect for myself. So the relationship, it wasn't so much, you pig, but it was good morning, sir. It was more of an ambassadorship because I recognized that I'm representing, black, brown, and indigenous people, all people really. You don't have to be black, person of color, and our struggle is a just struggle. And so similar to what Sister Kareemah said, the Islam changed my life and my relationship even with my enemies, and it caused them to even respect me more, all right, and to listen to what I had to say more, and to be able to do more. And it wasn't a capitulation, it was a principle stance. It's a difference. Secondly, it's like the impact of Islam on prisoners in prison life and going to prison and mass incarceration. So again, building on what Sister Kareemah said, our dysfunction in our communities is a result of systemic oppression and exploitation, degradation, and teaching us how to hate ourselves. But Islam builds a type of individual where we develop a sense of morality, where we're not killing, disrespecting, and damaging our own communities. You're not doing petty crimes. So it kind of like, hopefully, inshallah, Allah willing, it prevents you from going to prison, even though that's still a reality. You can be set up, framed, or whatever. So like as Al-Hajj Malik Al-Shabazz says, sell you dice or give you wine and liquor and bust you when you're gambling and bust you when you're drunk, so to speak. So if we stop gambling and getting drunk and selling drugs and all that type of stuff, then the less chance of them to be able to pick us off and, be victims of these oppressive laws that they have. The last thing I want to say that Islam is about justice. We are about abolishing the prison industrial complex. Now, however that is, war is a strategy, as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said. So we have to figure that out in connection with in collaboration with other movements in the United States. Some of them are secular, to not only dismantle a prison system, but in the process of that, you develop processes in our community that can provide those alternatives. You can't dismantle something. You can't call for defunding the police when you don't, who you going to call? So when we say we're going to dismantle something, Islam is about building something at the same time to take the place to be able to tend to the needs, food, clothing, shelter, protection needs of our community, our psychological needs, professionals, and whatever the case may be. So in answer to that question, it transformed my life. Hopefully it transformed the lives of people that's not have been incarcerated, the youngsters growing up, they'll transfer them lives so they can be, I don't want to use mealy mouth term, upright person, but actually that's what you are. Because you feel a lot in your conduct, your ethics, your adab, as it will in Arabic, is outstanding. So you won't be subject to just be victimized by your own devices. And lastly, again, Islam is definitely about the destruction of systemic racism, the destruction of oppression, the destruction of exploitation of our communities. So We're going to protest it, we're going to dismantle it, but at the same time, we're going to build a righteous society. Thank you.
I just want to pick up right there, because I think that's the point for me. And I don't know where people are in the room in terms of their understanding of abolition or their commitment to abolition. You know, we're at a moment, as we see in the election cycle, of extraordinary commitments to reform, not to radically disrupting the status quo. So, you know, abolition is about abolishing the criminal legal system, or at least certainly the prison industrial complex. And we have to begin by kind of understanding why that's necessary. If we understand slavery as a kind of example, maybe the best example of racial capitalism that we've seen in the modern era, that is to say, the system of capitalism feeds upon the exploitation of human beings, right? And as the Black radical tradition has taught us, particularly people like Cedric Robinson, this exploitation is racialized. It's not just that people get exploited in capitalist market. We get groups of people and we tell them that they're different, and socially we construct them as different. And race is a great way to do that. We take things that are relatively not different biologically and racialize them, right? And so in America, white supremacy is the organizing principle behind racial capitalism. And so what happens? You have a system that then tries to justify the enslavement of African people. And American economy is built on that. And as slavery ends, what happens? We get the continued racialization and exploitation of African people through the prison industrial complex. Slave catchers become police forces, et cetera, et cetera. And so the dismantling of the prison industrial complex is essential for creating any vision of justice. The problem is the whole world, and certainly this whole country, is organized around that exploitation. So there's a lot of people who have an investment in criminalization. And so when we talk about dismantling this stuff, and we talk about abolition, it's not enough to just say, hey, we're gonna get people out of prisons. There's lots of ways to get people out of prison. But we have to think about reimagining the system and the structure itself. We have to redesign society, we have to reorient values, we have to reshape our social relations to one another. And I think that is probably the biggest challenge, but that is exactly what's in line, I think, or aligns specifically or particularly with Islam, right? As we think about first the call towards, in Islam we call it adalah, or justice, right? This idea that what is a just world and what is a just outcome? Right now, in a criminal mindset or in a criminalizing mindset, our vision of justice is retributive, right? Who did it and how do we punish them? But the question might be, instead of who did it and how do we punish them, who was harmed and how do we make them whole again? Restorative justice, right? We move from retributive to restorative, which is exactly in line with Islam, right? I mean, if you read the Quran, what you see, or even if you read the Sunnah or the words of the Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you're talking about what? You're talking about an idea that say that when someone is harmed, you restore them to the extent of their loss. When someone is for example, if I steal your TV, right, which I could do, right? What does justice look like? Is it me getting you another TV? Is it me buying you 5 TVs? Is it me sitting in a cage for 5 years for theft? Is my harm, is the restorative process to you or is it to the state? These are all the kinds of questions that abolition forces us to think about and imagine differently, right? But that means, again, that we have to stop thinking about punishment. We have to think about people, but it also has to be, it has to be structural, right? It's not just an individual thing. There's a story real fast in Philadelphia. Young man a few years ago in West Philly, he had a knife. He was having a mental health episode. He had a knife in his hand. His mom had called the police 2 other times that week for help. And this time the police came. And she said, I need a wagon for my son because he's having an episode. And the police show up, and he pulls out a knife. And he starts, at some point, the police stand their ground. He starts going toward the police officer. Eventually, the police shoot him. And the debate in the news was, were the police right? What do you do if someone's running at you with a knife, right? And what abolition forces us to think about is not is the boy with the mental health issue right or wrong, or is the police officer who has a knife charged at him right or wrong? The bigger question is, what does it mean to live in a society where a mom's son is having a mental health breakdown, and there's no institution in society that could help him except an armed police force whose only job is escalation? Right? They're not trained to be police. They're not trained to be social workers. They're not trained to be mental health advocates. They're not psychologists. They're not psychiatrists. They're not therapists. And that boy, before he needed a police force, he needed those things long before the incident happened. He needed them 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I think he was 24. He probably needed them for 20 years. But we don't have the structures you talked about. We don't have the structures in society to make that boy whole. We don't have the systems in place to allow the police to not have to be there in the first place. Because as you say, it's not enough to just say we don't want the police to show up. We need somebody else to show up. And so we have to have a vision of justice, though, that says, well, he pulled a knife out, he needs to be punished. We need to have something different, a vision of justice that's different, which goes to the last thing I want to say, which is just, as Muslims, that's exactly what we're called to do. Right? Every Muslim in this room, everyone on the stage began their words with what? The tasmiyah. Right? Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, what? The most gracious, the most merciful, the beneficent, the merciful. When we dhikr, or recite the 99 names of Allah, how many of them are about grace and mercy and forgiveness and patience, right? How many of the 99 names are about, when you have surahs of the Quran that end, like Surah An-Nas, right? Which is, innahu kana tawwabin, right? Surely he was what? The acceptor of repentance. So much of Islam is about accepting bad acts with mercy, or not accepting, but responding to bad acts with mercy and grace and forgiveness and patience. So many of the stories of the Quran and the Bible are about what? About, right, God intervening with mercy and forgiveness and grace. And so somehow that switch goes off sometimes when we get back into the dunya, as they say, and we start to think about society. And now, so we got to lock them up. We got to put them in a cage. Oh, you need more time than that. Oh, you don't need no bail. We have to reorient that thinking toward a society that's structured around those values of forgiveness and mercy and justice, true justice.
Thank you. So thank you for everything what you guys were sharing, and this idea of sort of both the identification, the fact that this, I like what Brother Jihad said about the kind of the ills in our community because of this systemized oppression that we live under, right? And then we live in a society which responds to, right, the way we're responding to systemized oppression, right, through retribution, through captivity, through punishment. And Islam, right, sort of suggesting us to sort of understand our humanity and come from a place of mercy and grace, right, to sort of alternative ways. Like one of the things, I think this happened, I think someone said this early in the conference, and I generally believe this too, we always have to think bigger, right? We always have to think bigger than the context that we're in. And in fact, this is how Black people have survived in this space, by always having an imagination bigger than what they've been given. And one of the consequences, though, of this carceral system, on September 24th, the state of Missouri executed Imam Marcellus Khalifa Williams, right? And it was really kind of profound, his final words, right? And it was circulating on social media. And he's like, all praise is due to Allah, like under all conditions, right? And that kind of faith, I think, speaks to sort of kind of what is represented on this stage as well. But I wanted to kind of think about him, right, and may Allah be pleased with him, and kind of scope out in terms of what does it mean that there's this man, right, who was accused of a crime, right? He's been given a death sentence. There's all this activity to try to get him freed because they're like, again, all these inconsistencies around, the case and that type of thing. And the state kills him anyway, right? And so what does that, I want us to reflect a little bit on what that might mean, to think about what it means to be Black and to be Muslim in the United States in 2024, right? We got this election coming up, everyone's talking about, like, what is the murder of this man? What does it say? Or what do you think, how does it make you think about that question of being Black and Muslim in the US in 2024?
I guess I'll jump in. So When I think about the historical context of execution, it takes us back to slavery, where people were accused, didn't necessarily have an opportunity for a trial, and were publicly executed, hung from trees, um, decapitated in front of their peers. I think that in the instance where individuals are executed when evidence has been presented that this person is not guilty, or when community has forgiven, when we think about restorative justice, I think the ploy is to create a social fear amongst mankind. But clearly the fear component is not working, because as an African American woman, socially we know certain crimes that are committed, the penalty would be death, and people still move forward to commit whatever the crime is for whatever reason. But the ploy to socially condition people to make them fear that inevitably the system has the last say so. My personal response, and I was incarcerated in Georgia with the first woman that was executed in the state of Georgia in like 30 or 40 years. I had an opportunity to be in space with her, to spend time with her. And something that I realized after her execution was postponed, but they came back and still, the state still executed Kelly Gizendanner. Something that I understood in that moment is that only Allah is just. That we think that we know what justice looks like, right? And we think that we know what injustice looks like. But only Allah is just. And while we become so caught up with this world and being men and women of this world, like this is just a stopping point. This is not the do-all, be-all. And when we lose people to death, it's almost a sense of selfishness that wants to keep that person here. But oftentimes that I have to remind myself that this is a wicked world that we live in. There is nothing here. I mean, I will do my best while I'm here, but this is not a life that I'm clinging to, like, oh, I want to stay here forever. I would like to learn what is on the other side. And I know that Imam Marcellus, he is on the other side. He has seen the beauty that is with Allah, you know, the reward from being a righteous leader. And something that I always, the hadith in the Quran speaks of it as well, is that Allah hears the prayers of the oppressed. And so sometimes we don't necessarily know what that looks like coming from someone who's oppressed heart. But I believe that it's a fear tactic, and inevitably that only God is just.
And the prayers of the oppressed don't die with them, right? Right. Would anyone else like to respond to this question?
Yes. I'm the guy that's like, where's the mute button? Okay. Judge Taney still has his boot on our neck. Imam Marsalis was executed in Missouri, where the Dred Scott decision emanated from, and we're 3/5 of a person, and it's still reflected because it's all systemic. You know, it's not the man, it's the plan. Even though the man carries out the plan, so we witness that. And you know, the more things change in the United States of America, the more they remain the same. We have to see the advancement of technology beyond belief. Everything is changing in every last field. The only thing that remains the same, seems like in this dunya, in this world, is the relationship between the rich and the poor, the oppressor and the oppressed. That's been steady. Everything else is just, you can't even keep up with stuff. And it's reflected in the execution of our dear Imam. So building again on what Sister Kareemah said, we have to, when it comes to the elections, next 4 years we'll be faced with the same thing. What's missing, and maybe Brother Mark can build on this a little bit too, and Dr. Shabazz, but the movement has not, the gap between theory and practice is humongous. Because the best speech I could give, and I hope it would be a good one, but when you leave out the room, you're still faced with the 24/7 of the viciousness of the capitalist system, of the immorality of this system, because we haven't really developed infrastructure to pose an alternative. So when you go in that voting booth, you're faced with Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. because everybody know we don't have, because they can show their infrastructure. Go outside and look at, go down the street. The electrical grid, the infrastructure, the cities, the buildings, it is America. Oh my gosh. And what are you talking about? Some Islamic system? What does that even look like? Does it look like overseas? I hope not. You can't even talk about supporting Gaza in Saudi Arabia. You can't even wear this bracelet. You can't even say free Palestine. This coming from a Muslim country. So the United States can boast and brag how great we are and how you do have it. So I just wanted, y'all can build on this in 1 second. This is the biggest illusion in the world. So even when it comes to the execution of our imam, when it comes to prosecuting the police officer that killed George Floyd, just picking an example out of a zillion examples, we turn to the judicial system. And then when they do prosecute a cop or something like that, we applaud a system that has been responsible for mass incarceration, a racist system. They got us twirling around like crazy. It's really, really baffling to me. Not baffling, but it's a baffling situation. And what's missing, sisters and brothers, my comrades up here, is that if we can maybe speak to a little bit about the importance of building a real alternative, not talking about it, building it. When it even comes to land and our revolutionary activists and all these organizations, have you planted a tomato yet? Have you done anything yet? You go to South Africa, I've been there many times, my wife is there. You can go to a shanty place and they'll have a tire with dirt in it, growing some vegetable out of it in the vestibule of their house, in the kitchen, by the sink. Because the attitude about self-reliance and self-determination, a new way of life, even though they may not be able to actually manifest, at least it's in their hearts. But here we haven't done that. So, yeah, we're going to see many more imams being executed. Many, we are 5% of the world's population, Mark, right? And 25% of the prison population. Are we because we're a nation of criminals? No, so, we got to, Islamically, I hope we can live up to that, we have not developed that yet. And we need to develop the alternatives that is we need to develop the alternative. That's what I'm saying. You feel what I'm saying. I'll turn it over to Dr. Shabazz.
That's right. Thank you. When young people, and I tell my students, I tell young people all the time, in the 1950s, young people were marching, demonstrating, protesting, much like we've seen in recent times. And my father came along, young people wanting to integrate schools, to have better education, to have quality employment, quality lifestyle, basic respect for human life. My father came along and said, we demand our human rights as your brother. There's no asking. We demand our human rights as ordained by God. And so while we come from a legacy of violence, my mother witnessed, her children witnessed the assassination, the political assassination of her husband, of our father. But our mother made sure she poured into us. And, just the same, it's an opportunity to still have the capacity to love and not fall into despair. I'm always reminded, and I kind of chuckle about this quote that my father said, you don't take your case to the criminal, you take your criminal to the court. And so at some point, we have to come together and do this work so that we can really address these issues that continue to plague our communities. This legacy of violence, and that we are so traumatized that we sit back and we watch it happen. We sit back and we watch our young people, our elders, we watch people go off to prisons. And we can't do anything about it when we are the majority of good people in the world. And so it's like we have suffered post-psychological slave syndrome, right? We have suffered, and at some point we have to come together and truly address these challenges that continue to plague us, that allows us to sit back and watch these things happen.
Thank you. you know, when we started, before we were in the green room, Brother Jihad was like, we got how much time? Are you gonna get to all these questions, right? I was like, yeah, we're not gonna get to all our questions on my list, but because I wanna open it up to the audience, right? I wanna make sure that we have opportunity to hear from folks in the audience if you have questions for the panel. And I don't know, are there some written ones? Oh, okay. So, oh yeah. So if they have a question, they can. So if you have a question, there's paper you can write it down, and just Regina's in the corner there, raising her hand. All right. So this question says, have any of you come across the concept of creating a U.S. Department of Peace that might actually address questions of justice that is restorative?
If I may, my colleagues and comrades up here. So in 2021, there was a coalition established called the Spirit of Mandela, and we had a tribunal at the old Audubon, the Malcolm X Betty Shabazz Education and Cultural Center in 2021. We had a tribunal charging the United States government with the genocide of black, brown, and indigenous people. We had an international panel of 9 jurists to preside over a 91-page indictment that was tendered by the Howard University School of Law. Nkechi Taifa, who you may know, was the, she don't like me to say prosecutor, but she was the she was the lead attorney on the case, and I was her paralegal. And we proved, as you can imagine, that the United States is guilty of the genocide of black, brown, and indigenous people. But I'm saying all that to say that there's been tribunals before, William Patterson, et cetera, so we really built on the shoulders of them. But the difference was that we organized committees and communities and organizations around building up to this tribunal. It wasn't just a small set of lawyers in a room doing stellar and impossible work, but it was dozens and dozens now turned out to be hundreds of people that are involved in this tribunal. And so now we do have an initiative that's in its embryonic stages, you know, having a People's Senate, meaning in different regions we're organizing, first of all, acknowledging organizations that do not get credit for community work, feed, clothing, shelter, and the people. You know, we're acknowledging them, we're bringing them into a network, not asking them to change their mission statement or do anything else, not invisibilizing them under the umbrella of some other organization that come with their own, but building a network, and they will elect their own representatives. Those representatives will be elected as senators from different regions. How many in regions we're still in that stage there, how they would be compensated, their tenure and all of this. So check this out, Brother Mark. So, because I want y'all to tune in with this. So the whole thing is, and Dr. Abdul Kabir's question is that this is just one strategy, one amongst whatever else you may think about. But this is a viable strategy that's going to be able to network organizations across the United States to facilitate the transmission of accurate information, the sharing of resources, prioritizing them, to give us a bigger microphone so when we say incarceration, free Mamuya Abu Jamal, you know, that will mean something. Because we're networking organizations, you over there in San Francisco and Houston, Texas, and Portland, Oregon, and New York City, and Atlanta, Georgia, we'll be able to have a network that's really a Senate, a representation so that your voices can be heard, and hopefully through that, we can come up with viable solutions to be able to slowly change this dynamic, as Dr. Kabir is asking that question. So I just want to throw that out there. You can go that to spiritofmandela.com, Spirit of Mandela, no marks.
Love that.
.org, excuse me, Spirit of Mandela. And you can hear all about the tribunal, see who is who were the jurists, what was the testimonies, and maybe you'll be able to join that yourself. So I'm inviting you to do that. spiritofmandela.org. Thank you.
I would just really quickly add to that. That's the people. That's coming from the ground. That's not coming from the state. And so there won't be a U.S. Department of Peace. We can't expect government institutions to produce institutions or programs that'll lead to their undoing. Nation states are built around and organized around violence and exploitation and oppression. And any resistance to that is not going to come from a ballot box. It's not going to come from a State Department. It's not going to come from somebody in a suit that's going to come save you. It's going to come from us, as Spirit of Mandela demonstrates, right? it's going to come from us doing the work on the ground. It doesn't mean we don't do those other things. You vote, please vote on Tuesday, y'all. Vote, work, resist in all these areas, but understand that any radical change to this nation is going to come from the people disrupting the system, not appealing to the system.
Oh, okay. So there are really good questions here. Okay. So how about I just say them, and then if you want to pick one. I mean, these are great questions. I think. Well, so one question. Maybe I'll start with this one, because you mentioned the election, and I think it says suggestions for combating the co-opting of revolutionary language and images by mainstream liberals. So that's a question that I think would be interesting to pose. Also, there was a question about the discussion. They were thanking us for the discussion and saying this issue being raised speaks to the problem of religious privilege in the country, which undermines the constitutional rights of people of all religious traditions. And so what efforts are happening in your context to address religious freedom concerns, which relates to another question that thinking about, how do we think about these questions of abolition and expand beyond the Abrahamic frame, right? So, Islam is part of what they call the Abrahamic tradition, right? Sort of like Judaism, Christianity, Islam, but thinking about, like, how does our collective liberation include folks, right, who are not within those traditions and may be part of, sort of spiritualities that are older and are marginalized. And I know, for example, there's a colleague friend of mine, I'm forgetting her name. Her last name is Abolition de Jesus, and she talks about how, Ifa communities get criminalized, right, by the state because of their religious practices. So the questions, again, are just around co-opting of revolutionary language, questions of religious freedom and marginalization, and also sort of how do we be more inclusive in our liberation, right, beyond sort of just even your own tradition. So that's the range of questions we have, and you can choose as you wish.
Could you repeat that? No, just joking.
Huh?
I would say really briefly, that's where it's briefly, is that the language battle will go on. It's even more intense now with the advent of social media. You can have one person that does nothing that has thousands of followers, and you can have people that do a lot of work that have no followers. They may not even be. So we have that challenge to deal with now. But the way to power through that is to be able to materially and structurally and build infrastructure so that it won't be just a matter of arguing back. No, we're black. No, African American. No, we're just liberal, this and that. Because your actions, your positive, progressive actions, your brick and mortar infrastructures in your community will speak for itself. Then when you're able to show that you're addressing the needs of the people through your and involving them in that process, then it don't matter what you say. I don't care if you call yourself black. This is polemics, and the person that brings you into that space probably is not doing a damn thing about anything. And then you're not going, because I learned a long time ago in prison, I don't care. You call yourself what you want. You're doing the work, because the only way that we're going to make a difference is by doing the work, because the battle of words will continue. It's always been there. But you can power through that through your work, and quite naturally, you're not going to please everybody. We're not trying to. We're trying to establish a system of justice that's alternative to this beast, to be able to change our living and then through the power of the people, by involving the people in real work, real infrastructure, real programs for our youth and children, we can abolish the systems of oppression over a period of time, and Allah knows best, because victory and success is only with Allah, but the only thing we can do is account for our own actions and doing the best we can. Thank you.
So we have about 5 minutes. Oh, wait. Oh, there's more. Hold on. Okay. All right, let's see. So I think we have 5 minutes left. And so I think this question is related to the question that I had initially for us to kind of close out with, right? And I think, Brother Jihad, you've been talking about this in terms of with the spirit of Mandela and sort of doing the work. And so the question really is, what do you think we should be doing? Or what kind of suggestions do you have for the folks here, for the folks watching, right? In terms of this work, right? Whether it's your organizing, your art, your faith, what we should be doing to move towards abolition, right? So we've identified that mass incarceration is damaging, we have identified where it comes from, the consequences of it, right? The need for abolition. And so to do the work, as Brother Jihad was saying, like what are the kinds of things that you would suggest, right, for folks to get involved in or to do the work? And I would invite everyone to respond to that as we close out today.
For me, the part of it is making sure, actually, and just to the previous question you asked also, I think that our religious traditions, our faith traditions, they all speak to some sort of sense of justice, fairness, goodness, et cetera, that are in line with abolition. I don't think you have to be Muslim or Christian, or you don't have to be a santera, you don't have to be any of these things necessarily to arrive at abolition. I see abolition as something that our faith traditions can lead us to or help give us insight into. But I see abolition as a political project, as a radical political project to repair the world. And so for me, they're almost two different lanes. We've been talking about Malcolm X a lot, quite appropriately. And so I think about the separation of the OAAU and Muslim Mosque Incorporated, right? You know, I think about the idea of saying, hey, there's a secular movement here that binds all of us because we're all under these same conditions of oppression. And then there's a way that Muslims can move in a certain way so that we can organize and build and connect. Rest in peace to the great Sekou Odinga, by the way, who's also part of that radical tradition. And so I just want to say that as we go back and revisit Message to the Grassroots and in these speeches where, you know, Brother Malcolm makes it quite clear, and Ballad of the Bullet where Malcolm makes it quite clear what our priority should be, and not just Malcolm, but that's just my example. To your other thing, lastly, I was just saying it's about the language. I think we begin by making sure we're on the same page politically, not just the language, but the vision, right? That we're articulating the proper freedom dream, right? We don't want warmer and fuzzier prisons. We don't want police officers that dance with us and play basketball with us. You know what I mean? That's the wrong freedom dream. That is a constraint on the radical imagination, right? We need audacious, ambitious freedom dreams. We need to be able to imagine the world otherwise, I'll say, or a world that is not yet. And if we're not doing that, if we don't share that concept, because sometimes I hear people co-opt the language of the radical, they co-opt the language of the revolutionary, and they use it to smuggle in liberal reform projects. So we have to be very clear-headed and honest about what we're doing here when we say we want a radical imagination, or that we want abolition. And then as we do that, I think we then have to make sure in our respective domains, it's not just a criminal legal system that's carceral. You walk in any prison, any school, excuse me, that's probably Freudian, you walk in any school and it's a prison. So we almost don't even like the language of school to prison pipeline because it suggests that schools just lead you to prison. No, schools have become carceral spaces. When you got a school resource officer in there dragging kids out and locking them up, that's carceral. When you got these rooms, when they empty out libraries and hold kids there for 8 hours a day and an in-school suspension, that's carceral, right? Schools don't just lead you to prison, schools have become them. And so we could look at all of every domain in our world and say, how are we not promoting the vision of restorative justice and instead imposing or reinforcing a carceral logic? That's what I would say. So let's just do that in all of our areas. Let's be critical. Let's make sure we're asking the right questions and make sure we're on the same page. And if this ain't for you, step out the way, right? But don't step in and say you're doing abolition when you're not. And then figure out how we can impose an abolitionist imagination in all these spaces.
There was one thing that I wanted to share before we close out. And I'm glad that Mark kind of hit the school to prison pipeline topic. And I just want everybody here to pay attention because as a psychology major and as someone with lived experience from the justice system, there are some things that I want to point out that are very important and critical to day-to-day life, especially when you have children that are school age. The school to prison pipeline is larger than just the food that's being served. The same chicken nuggets that they fighting over in 6th grade is the same chicken nuggets being served inside the prison, but I want to take it just a little bit deeper. Every year I'm invited to a Jewish academy to speak, right? These are very well-off youth. There are no metal detectors in that school. The metal detectors in public schools, the large presence of police in those schools are to condition our youth to accept prisons and jails as a normal place so that you don't live in a state of hysteria when they tell you to take off your clothes. This is a strip search. You're not in a state of hysteria when they give you property and they give you a clear net bag, mesh bag, and they're telling our youth in the public school system, your book bag must be what color? Your book bags must be clear, right? When we think about something as simple as moving in 2-hour intervals, in the prison system, everything happens on that same system. So the school system is conditioning you to move every 2 hours. That same system conditions you in school. If you leave the classroom during class to go to the bathroom, you have to have what? In prison, you cannot go anywhere outside of regular movement hours unless you have a pass. You're being conditioned, right? Our youth are being sprayed, are being tased. They're being conditioned so that once they enter the criminal justice system, there's not a state of hysteria, right? And so speaking to these specific things, it's different when you feed kids McDonald's and you don't tell them what's in it. So we have to speak to our youth and show them how they are being conditioned. We cannot just tell our youth because I said so, right? You have to show them how this is affecting their life on a day-to-day basis. The strangest things is bells ringing, right? As doors slamming. All of these things are literal conditions. And so I didn't want to leave today. And so, as Mark said, if it goes over your head, it wasn't for you, right? But there is someone here that needs this information and needs to take it back. It needs to be conveyed, and we need to be reminded of the systems, the medical system, the educational system, the carceral systems. These are all systems that are created to control us as people. Thank you.
Thank you, sister. That's beautiful. You know, one of the greatest gifts and what governs my work is that my parents gave me the ability to love myself. And when I went and volunteered and mentored in high school at lockup group homes and so forth, I never understood why the young people were not animated, why they sat sort of empty-eyed, kind of docile somewhat. I realized that my parents gave me the ability to love who I am. And so when I wrote my first book, it was to make sure that children could open a book, learn about Malcolm X, the truth about him, but also have something to learn about themselves. And so as a child, I learned about the significant contributions that women made to the world, that Islam made to the world, that people of the African diaspora as a first world nation made to the world. So I had a very solid sense of who I was. I was able to love who I was. I didn't rely on others to determine my self-worth or to tell me who I should be. And I'm so grateful to my parents for that I set out to do the same for as many young people as I can. I didn't set out to be a professor, right? Dr. Mark, I know that this is one of the reasons why you're also a professor, so that we could help control the narrative of our stories. And so we learned about the oneness of God, hence the oneness of humanity, right? We learned to truly love ourselves and see you as a reflection of me and me as a reflection of you, so that if there was injustice of any kind, that we would lend ourselves to save it, rather than not love ourselves, hence not love a reflection of ourselves, and definitely not going to do anything to address these shackles that we still have, right? And so, sister, I just think that, you know, it is absolutely so important that we do take responsibility, that we are accountable, and it's what Islam teaches us. We have to individually be accountable for the actions that we make, for the lives that we live, for the choices that we choose. And when we don't learn this lesson, we get caught in a cycle of division and self-destruction. And so I think it is absolutely so important that we are controlling the narratives of our children's education. We know the cradle of civilization for human civilization is in Africa, right? And imagine if we learned about the kingdoms of Benin, of Ghana, of Egypt, of Mali, in the same manner that we learn about ancient Greece and Rome, and that we were accountable to making sure that our children have the capacity to truly love themselves and know why. I think it's absolutely so important, and I'm so grateful that that is what my parents gave to each of their 6 daughters. The capacity to love themselves, to see us as a reflection of one another, and to step in however we can, right? But that it's not my sole responsibility. It's each of our responsibility, because each one of us will be accountable on Judgment Day. Each one of us will inevitably perish. And rather, as I tell my students, be on your deathbed and have these epiphanies of the things that I focused on which really didn't matter, and the things that I know right from wrong, that I know deep inside of myself, right from wrong, that is how we are to live our lives, and they become more intentional and more purposeful at a younger age when we understand these things. But the only way our young people are going to understand is, first, we have to know, and we have to make sure that we are instilling these values in our children, an opportunity to instill values of honesty, of compassion, and if we want to add in forgiveness, right? But we have to be responsible in instilling these values ourselves and not wait for someone else to do it who already has it. My father said only a fool would sit back and let his enemy teach his children.
All right. Well, yes. I think that is a particularly powerful, important place for us to end today. I want to thank each and every one of our speakers for coming and sharing from your expertise and your knowledge and experience on this really important topic. And, you know, I think ending on the point of young people, right? The theme of this conference is like religions envisioning change forward, right? And so I think ending on this idea of sort of young people is really powerful as well. Free Mumia, free Imam Jamil, free Leonard Peltier, free them all.
Oh, wonderful. Wasn't this panel dynamic? I want to thank Dr. Suad Abdul Kabir and to the entire panel. Thank you for closing us out so powerfully and communicating both the beauty of the faith and also the urgency of ending the carceral state. Thank you so much. Thank you. Give them another hand, please. And now it's time to say goodbye. This has been a wonderful experience over the last 2.5 days, and as we come to a close, I've been thinking about how does one close well. I think the eloquence with which they have communicated the topic of free 'em all is a really good close. But if I were to leave one word with you, it would just be what we began with, and that's forward. If you liked anything, if you loved anything, if you were moved by anything over your time here today or while you have been with us, keep moving forward, keep pushing these ideas forward, continue the conversations in community, and come back and see us, please. We're not going to stop having the conversations that are important. This is just the beginning. This is just the first Forward Conference. Next year, we'll continue to expand the conversation, and then the following year, we'll be back for something much like what we have done, and it will be even better. How do I know that it gets better from here? Because, y'all, I work with a dynamic team of folks. They never stop moving, thinking and working and making things better. This could not have been possible without the dynamic team of folks that I am blessed to go to work with every day, virtually and in person here at the museum. And I just want to give a shout out first and foremost to that team. You might have seen Dr. Teddy Reeves moving throughout the place, along with curating the wonderful selection of films on Black religion. He is also responsible for a number of ideas that you see throughout this conference, and is just a wonderful colleague and collaborator. We were at AAR, the Academy of American Religions conference last year, talking about, wouldn't it be wonderful to have something like this for Black religion? And then we said, oh yeah, we work at a museum. I mean, shouldn't we be the ones? And so this idea was born out of having the conversations that we thought were most important in this moment. And so thankful to him, to our museum curator of religion, new to the field. She's new to this, but she's true to this. Brittany Livingston, Dr. Livingston is responsible for the programs, the beauty and the detail that you see in those programs, and also the number of artifacts that it introduces, religious objects throughout our museum, along with our graphic designer, Dustin Pickett. As well, whenever you do an event like this, procurement is a reality. And so there is expertise that you will never see in the work of Donna and Janine, and also greeting you and moving about, that has been so richly done, and they have done it with such skill and grace. I want to be cognizant in saying thank you to the work that you can't see as well, and also for the recording and everything that's happening here in the theater and has gone on. Our program producer, Kim Moore, as well, is responsible for that. And always have to give thanks to the folks that pay the bills, and that's the Lilly Endowment. It is through their generous support that we're able to do this work today and always. As well, last night there was a wonderful performance by Danielle Ponder. Wouldn't have been possible without public programs, special events. Allison, James, Cherise, Michael, and the Center for African American Media Arts, LaCharles Ward, the Center for Global Slavery, Paul and Katie, and the finance folks that tell us where and how we can spend. We're so thankful for them, Tiffany and Tiana and Shanita, and everybody that has made this work possible, from my own partner who's here today and daughter, who have been hearing about Forward for far too long. But have, in ways that no one will ever know, made this work for me possible. We have deep gratitude for each one of you. And I just want to say thank you as well to the center led by Dr. Kabir as well, the African Muslim and Genealogies of White Supremacy, that has made this kind of close possible. Please stay in touch with us, si.edu, NAMOC, si.edu. Please check us out, and please come to our future events. We love to see folks around the museum and at our public programs. Thank you, and get home safely.